Since the start of this channel, we've been asked to review Emotiva speakers more times than I care to remember. Today we finally have their new AIRMOTIV XT2 tower loudspeaker, and one thing is for sure, the new AIRMOTIV line has a brand new look. This series has been entirely redesigned inside and out. Gone is that old stealth fighter look, and it's been replaced with a more refined style. Now, if you're looking at the XT2 and thinking, where have I seen this speaker before? These bear a striking resemblance to MARTINLOGAN's Motion series, and I wasn't the biggest fan of the previous AIRMOTIV look, so I am really happy to see Emotiva go in a new direction here. And while a black box isn't anything new, the leatherette texture found on the top and sides of the XT2 is a really nice touch. The XT2 is part of the updated AIRMOTIV series that consists of 3 towers, a single pair of bookshelves, 3 center channels, a pair of surrounds, and several subwoofers to round out a complete Emotiva home theater. The XT2 is the middle child among the new towers, and this 3-way speaker has a total of 5 drivers. 3 6-inch woofers, a 5 1/4-inch mid-range driver, and a roughly 1-inch folded ribbon tweeter. Combined with its rear-facing port, the XT2s have a reported frequency response of 40 Hz to 27 kHz. Now, efficiency is stated to be 90 dB, but that comes with a pretty big asterisk. While 90 dB is fairly sensitive, these speakers have an impedance of 4 ohms, which for a more budget-friendly speaker, this 4 ohm rating requires a lot of power. Even Emotiva themselves recommend that customers use an amp of at least, get this, 100 watts per channel, if not greater, to power any speaker in the AIRMOTIV series. So let's talk about that. It took me all of about 2 minutes to realize how power hungry these speakers are. I initially set up the XT2s using their matching center, the XC2 using Sony's 5000 ES receiver. Home theater speakers with a home theater receiver makes sense, right? And I've had great success with Sony's ES receiver line, but this pairing was an absolute disaster, forcing me to pause the new film Fall Guy several times while I tried to figure out just what was wrong. The speakers sounded strained and fatiguing, and after only a few minutes, the Sony was so hot to the touch that I became very concerned. For the record, the 5000 ES puts out 120 watts in stereo and has no issues driving other taxing speakers such as the KEF R11 Metas or SVS Titans, so this really confused me. So I grabbed Primare's A35.2, a stereo amplifier with an MSRP of $4,000, not to mention 400 watts per channel into 4 ohms. The Primare was definitely a better fit. For home theater, it wasn't until I connected the Emotivas to the $6,000 Primare SPA25 Prisma receiver with its 250 watts of max power per channel into 4 ohms that I felt I could adequately judge the XT2's performance. These were so power hungry that I reached out to my contact at Emotiva to ask about the speaker's hefty appetite. I was told, and I'm paraphrasing, that the new speakers, including the XB2 bookshelf speakers, were developed in-house using Emotiva's own amplifiers. No real surprise there. Now, my first guess was that they used something from the BASS line, so in keeping with the AIRMOTIV's price point. According to Emotiva, they used their XPA line of amps, which start at $1,200 for 2 channels. Now, thankfully, we have a custom XPA 3-channel amp, and I can confirm that it does drive the Emotivas with little fuss. So, if you are considering any of the AIRMOTIV speakers, even the currently sold out bookshelves, you need to budget for a higher powered amp. One more note about Emotiva's power needs. These speakers' dynamic capabilities are very much amplifier and volume dependent. The XT2 needs a lot of volume to really come to life. I am talking volumes pushing beyond 75 dB. What's odd is that the forcefulness of the sound doesn't seem to change much as you turn things up. The XT2 is like a sonic light switch. It is either on or it's off. Carl, if you are looking for a full throttle home theater speaker that is capable of pulse pounding, sweat inducing cinematic experiences at those high volumes, here you go, brother. But Carl, damn it, if you want to be more chill now and you want to watch a movie at a more reasonable volume, the XT2 is not that speaker. And there is no way to really discuss this speaker's sound without addressing placement. Whether you plan to use these speakers for home theater or two-channel listening, these are incredibly sensitive to placement, largely due to their directivity. Straight up, this speaker has a very narrow dispersion from top to bottom. This means the XT2 does not cast a wide and open soundstage. It is very directional, so even its center imaging can be dramatically affected by the use of toe-in. How much or how little you toe in the speaker can also radically change its perceived brightness. The same is true of your seated listening height. To be honest, I never settled on a placement that I felt was 100% ideal for every situation. Look, these speakers are one of the more confusing that I've heard in a while, and I was so confused by these speakers, I wanted to do everything I could to take my room out of the equation when explaining my thoughts. First, I took measurements of the XT2 in the near field, and straight away, on axis, the tower looked pretty good. I mean, from 100 hertz to about 2 kilohertz, this is as linear or as neutral a speaker in the mid-range as one could hope for at this price. I mean, look at it. Review over, right? This is a damn good example of how measurements and one listening experience can be at total odds. My subjective listening impressions in no way match the measured response. Well, not until I started to look a little bit closer at the tweeter. On axis, we can see that coming out of the dip at 2 kilohertz, the treble energy starts to rise, and it doesn't really roll off until after we crest 20 kilohertz, which helps explain what I was hearing. On axis, the XT2 is bright, even capable of causing some fatigue, regardless of whether I was watching movies or listening to music. But look what happens when we move off axis and we point the speaker straight ahead rather than toed in. The treble behaves very differently, rolling off and remaining somewhat rolled off coming out of the dip at 2 kilohertz. And while I preferred hearing the speakers in this position, they were definitely less bright. The center imaging was more vague and less intelligible. It also caused the sound to bunch around the speakers rather than them disappear into a more holographic three-dimensional soundstage. In other words, the XT2s are very easy to locate because of their narrower dispersion. But I don't listen in the near field, and I don't expect you will either with a tower like this one. At my listening position, which for this review was about 12 feet from the speaker's front baffles, with the speakers sitting about 9 to 10 feet apart from each other, the top end of the XT2 is really weird. Again, massive props to Emotiva for nailing this speaker's mid-range performance. Between the goalposts of 200 hertz to 2 kilohertz, this is arguably as good as it gets. But in order to compare the XT2's near field to its in-room response, I towed them in towards my listening position. And not surprisingly, the highs were not great. There is a massive dip, followed by a sizable hump that juices the sibilants in vocals and adds a sensation of ringing to metallic instruments like cymbals. The sonic contrast between, say, 4 kilohertz and 10 kilohertz is as much as 10 dB in spots, resulting in an inconsistent top end that could sound radically different, track to track or scene to scene. Directly A-Bing the Airmotivs against the SVS Titans and Bowers & Wilkins 705 signatures, 3 speakers that could technically be classified as brighter leaning, the XT2s lack the coherence of the competition. And yes, obviously, we have the XC2 center, and I measured it as well. In the near field, on axis, the center, like the towers, measures impressively. On paper, it could be a little bit bright for some, but all things considered, really hard to complain about. Again, on paper, Emotiva looks like they've come out with the next giant killer. But if you don't have that tweeter at or very close to ear level, which for a center this big is going to be next to impossible, opinions of its performance are likely to vary wildly. With the tweeter roughly 6 to 8 inches below our seated ear height, we can see the treble start to fall off a cliff around 10 kilohertz. Now this solves some sibilance issues, sure, definitely tames brightness, but it also affects intelligibility negatively. Not to mention, changes the speaker's timbre to such a degree that it no longer matches the towers. As I listened to my own video's dialogue tracks pan from the left speaker to the center, then over to the right, the timbre of my voice varied dramatically. Christy and I noted the exact same thing when watching dialogue-heavy scenes in the film Fall Guy and the real estate reality show Buying London. There was a definite shift in tone as sound moved left to right, right to left across the center of the screen, resulting in vocals sounding chesty and more localized as they reach the center. Now, on a more positive note, the center speaker's presence filled in the middle of the XT2's soundstage, which let me leave the towers pointed straight ahead versus towed in. Moving on to the XT2's mid-range, this is one area where the speaker is very impressive. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to appreciate because you're distracted by the tweeter's inconsistency and directionality. The mid-range, though, it's also a touch directional, probably due to the speaker's front baffle design. I don't know. The drivers don't look any more or less recessed to me, but like I said earlier, this is just not a wide imaging speaker. And a few quick notes about the XT2's bass. It can cause some dialogue or vocals to sound a little chesty because it has a boost that kicks in around 200 Hz, which can be enhanced depending on room conditions. This is not uncommon, but it sounds a little bit more pronounced here because the speaker does not play as low as the competition, cutting very abruptly right at 40 Hz. So the XT2 has a punchy demeanor, but not a lot of weight, which is surprising for a three-way tower that uses 3 woofers. More surprisingly, the XT2 barely plays lower than its bookshelf counterpart, which makes no sense to me. This is definitely a loudspeaker that requires a subwoofer for full-range playback. Naturally, when it comes to comparisons, you shouldn't be surprised that I'm going to prefer just about anything else, but here goes. Starting with Emotiva's doppelganger, MARTINLOGAN's Foundation F2. The Emotiva will cost you about half as much as the F2. Both speakers have a similar driver layout. They even use similar tweeter tech. I mean, come on, look at them. If I took the logos away, could you even tell them apart? But appearances aside, the Logans measured nowhere near as ruler flat, but they produce a more full-range sound with better dispersion and a less spicy top end. I still say that the XT F100, also from MARTINLOGAN, that's worth saving up for, but if that's just not in the cards, the F2 gets my vote over the XT2. Another obvious comparison is KLIPSCH 8000F Mark II, another speaker that on paper does not look as impressive as the Emotiva, but damn is its in-room performance just way better than the XT2. Both speakers can be dynamically forceful, but the KLIPSCH, it brings a truer scale to the front of the soundstage. There's greater width and height, and these are two things that you want in a home theater, especially if you can't rely on a bunch of other speakers to fill in the gaps. And when it comes to the bass, it's not even a contest. Oh, here you go. How about the POLK R700? The only thing these two speakers have in common is their thirst for power. Now, I suppose I could give the win to the Emotiva for dynamics, but aside from that, the POLK is hands down the better speaker. Closing out the comparisons with the previous generation AIRMOTIV speakers, as I understand it, the development of the new line was done entirely in-house, which is a departure for the brand when it comes to the design of its speakers. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan of the old AIRMOTIVs, but I do not recall them being quite so fussy or as directional. So my advice, if you own the older speakers and you're happy with them, I would stick with what you know. If you're craving something new, I have no idea what you're going to think of the new line because it is definitely new. Try as I might, and I did try, the XT2 and I simply did not jive, and that's okay. Hopefully by this point, I've given you the clearest picture of my experience, and I would not blame anyone for wanting to try these speakers out for themselves, and I think you should in order to come to your own conclusion. But my conclusion is, these just aren't the speaker for me. So that's it. That is now my take on Emotiva's Airmotiv XT2 tower loudspeaker and a little bit of their center thrown in. Now it's time for you to tell me what you think, and I'm sure there's going to be quite a bit. And remember, some of your questions we may put in Friday's follow-up Unplugged, where you're going to get to hear Christy's thoughts on the XT2 as well. But until then, if you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like and subscribe. Go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Christy's left for you down below, know that that's a great way that you have continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here. And both of us, thank you very much for doing that. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it for me today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. See you Friday with a brand new Unplugged. And until then, have a great rest of your day. Bye.